When I was 21, I often stayed alone at my parents' house. They lived in a quiet neighborhood with large properties, and our backyard opened directly onto a lake. Across the lake, there was a small town park, but it was rare to see anyone there at night. One summer evening, I was in the sunroom watching TV. The room was perfect for warm nights, with open windows and a refreshing breeze. I was completely relaxed until I heard noises coming from outside. At first, it sounded like birds splashing in the lake, which was common, but the sound persisted and became heavier, like someone was in the water. Curious, I stepped onto the deck to investigate. I listened carefully and heard a man humming along with the splashing sounds. The idea of someone swimming in the lake made me uncomfortable, especially since each house owned a specific section of it. I turned on the backyard lights, and the sound stopped immediately. Whoever it was had seen me. I went back inside, locked the door, and texted my brother, but he didn't reply. Trying to calm down, I sat back down, but then I heard footsteps on the deck. I turned off the TV, leaving the room in complete silence. That's when I heard heavy breathing near the window. My heart pounded. Suddenly, a deep voice said, "I see you." Panicked, I asked, "Paul, is that you?" Paul being the name of a neighbor. There was no response, just the sound of footsteps retreating. After gathering my courage, I checked the doors and stepped onto the deck. I saw wet footprints leading to the side. Following the trail, I spotted a head peeking over the edge of the deck. As soon as we made eye contact, the figure disappeared. I called the police, but they found nothing. To this day, I have no idea who it was, but I'll never forget that night. I have a dog that I walk 3 times a day, once in the morning, again in the afternoon, and finally at night. We always take the same route, which starts from our driveway and leads into a cul-de-sac parking lot for the condominium complex we live in. This routine is important to understand what happened on one specific night. On our nighttime walk, I always go out pretty late. I'm not sure why. It's just been a habit since I got him. It had never been an issue until this one night. As we approached the parking lot, I began to hear something. It sounded like a voice, faint and coming from ahead of me. At first, I dismissed it as my imagination since I was listening to music with one AirPod in. But then, the sound became clearer. It was a voice, and it wasn't my imagination. I stopped in my tracks, took out the AirPod, and stood completely still, trying to focus on the noise. It sounded like a muffled voice calling out. Then, distinctly, I heard the word, "Help." My heart dropped. I pointed my flashlight ahead, but couldn't see anything. I was sure the sound was coming from the area where the cars were parked, but no one was visible. Trying to reassure myself, I walked forward cautiously. My dog, who was sniffing around some bushes, didn't seem to notice anything at first. But then his ears perked up, and he looked in the same direction I was facing. That's when I heard it again. The word, "Help," was repeated 3 more times. The voice sounded strange, not quite like a child's, but also not entirely like an adult's. It was muffled, and the tone never changed. It was as if the voice was emotionless, like a recording. Panic set in. I pointed the flashlight at every possible angle, shining it between the cars and into the shadows, but there was no sign of anyone. The situation felt too eerie, and I decided to leave immediately. Grabbing my dog, I ran straight home. Once home, I tried to explain what had happened to my mom. She was puzzled, but didn't think calling the police was necessary. She suggested it might have been my imagination, but I knew what I'd heard, and my dog's reaction confirmed it wasn't just in my head. To this day, I still wonder, was someone really in need of help, or was it something much darker waiting for me to come closer? The story I'm about to share is why my parents moved out of a house that had been in our family for 3 generations. I've struggled with depression for most of my life, and as a kid, it was especially hard. I spent a lot of time alone in my room. The house was surrounded by trees on 3 sides, and my bedroom had windows facing the woods. At night, it felt isolated and terrifying. When I was around 10, I started noticing strange things happening. It began with my nightlight, which I always kept on the red setting. One night, I woke up randomly and saw that the nightlight had changed to a different color. I was too tired to think much of it and fell back asleep. But the same thing happened again a week later. This time, I asked my parents about it, and they told me it was probably just a glitch. Then one morning, I woke up to find the nightlight unplugged and lying on the floor. I asked my parents why they were messing with it, but they denied touching it. Their dismissal frustrated me, but I tried to let it go, until one day, the nightlight disappeared completely. When I confronted my parents, they denied taking it. The situation escalated into an argument, with both sides accusing the other. My parents insisted I was old enough not to need nightlight, but I knew I wasn't imagining things. A few nights later, I started waking up in the middle of the night for no apparent reason. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I began hearing faint rustling noises coming from my closet. I told my parents, but they dismissed my fears again. My dad even checked the closet and found nothing unusual, but the rustling continued for several nights. Finally, my dad decided to prove there was nothing to be afraid of. He started clearing out the closet while I watched. As he pulled out old toys and posters, he froze. Behind one of the posters, there was a hole in the wall. It was deep, so deep that it led outside. My dad ran outside to investigate and discovered a tunnel at the base of the house leading directly to the woods. That was the last night I spent in that house. My mom and I stayed with my aunt until we moved out permanently. To this day, my parents refuse to talk about it. Knowing that someone had been in my room, possibly every night, still chills me to my core. My name is Leo, and to be completely honest, I feel lost in life right now. My family situation is terrible. My childhood friends have drifted away, and my hometown feels like it has nothing left for me. Hoping to find some purpose, I traveled to Berlin last year. What happened there, though, has stayed with me ever since. One night, I went to a bar called Ruya. I was alone, something I'd gotten used to over the years. As I was getting ready to leave, I realized my apartment keys were missing. It was late, and there was no way to get a replacement set at that hour. With nowhere to go, I decided to find a place to sleep. To make matters worse, it started raining. Eventually, I found shelter under a nearby bridge. As I was drifting off, I heard faint voices across the river. Sitting up, I saw 5 men standing by a small boat. They didn't seem to notice me, so I stayed silent. It didn't take long to figure out what was happening. They were exchanging briefcases and duffel bags. It looked like a drug deal or something equally illegal. Suddenly, one of the men shouted angrily in German and pointed a gun at another man. There was a tense moment of silence before the man with the gun began stripping the other man of his belongings. It was clear the man with the gun was in charge. I wanted to leave, but I was afraid moving would draw attention to myself. But then, one of the men shouted in my direction. He must have seen me. I didn't wait to find out what they wanted. I just ran. I ran until my lungs burned, terrified they might shoot at me. By the time I stopped, I was miles away and completely exhausted. Even now, I think about that night and how close I might have been to losing my life. It's a reminder of how unpredictable the world can be. It was a typical Friday afternoon at school. I was walking down the hallway with my friend Emma, trying to get through the day. I had a lot on my mind. Things weren't great at home, and school wasn't much better. As we passed the cafeteria, I suddenly needed to use the bathroom. I asked Emma if she needed to go, but she said she'd wait outside. When I walked into the bathroom, it was completely empty. That struck me as odd because it was one of the most popular restrooms in the school. I shrugged it off, went into a stall, and began to do my business. A few seconds later, I heard the bathroom door open and close abruptly. The strange part, I didn't hear any footsteps after the door shut. I assumed whoever had entered was just hiding from an administrator or something. I finished up, buttoned my jeans, and opened the stall door. Emma was waiting for me outside, but she had a weird look on her face, almost like she'd seen something shocking. I asked her what was wrong, and she asked, "Who was standing behind you in the stalls?" I froze. "No one was in the stall with me," I said, assuming she was joking. But Emma wasn't the type to joke about something like that. She explained that when she entered the bathroom, she saw someone standing right behind me in the stall, their shoes almost touching mine. Freaked out, she had turned around and left immediately. I didn't know what to say. I remembered hearing the door open earlier, but I hadn't heard anyone leave. Emma insisted she was telling the truth, and her seriousness gave me chills. I told the school administrator, but they dismissed it as a misunderstanding or a prank. I still don't know what Emma saw that day, but the thought of someone being so close to me unnoticed makes my stomach churn. After moving into a small rental house in a new town, everything seemed perfect. The house was cozy, the neighborhood was quiet, and the landlord, Michelle, was friendly. I had been living there for a few weeks when something strange started happening. One night, there was a knock at the door. I went to the door and called out, "Who's there?" But there was no response. I didn't open the door. The next morning, I found a note taped to the glass of the storm door. It read, "Hello, beautiful." I felt uneasy, but hoped it was just a one-time thing. I crumpled the note and threw it away. The next night, there was another knock, and in the morning, another note. This one said, "I like watching you." I took a picture of the note and sent it to Michelle, asking if she had any enemies or past renters who might be harassing her. She claimed she had no idea who could be doing this. I decided to leave a note of my own. I wrote, "If you're looking for Michelle, she doesn't live here anymore. If you keep coming here, I will report you to the police." I thought that would be the end of it, but the next morning, there was another note. It said, "I'm not looking for Michelle. I'm looking for you," followed by my name. At that point, I called my dad, who drove over immediately. That night, we heard noises outside again and called the police. When they arrived, the stalker had already disappeared. I didn't feel safe staying there anymore and moved out soon after. Thankfully, the stalker didn't follow me, but I still wonder who they were and what their intentions were. During college, I spent a lot of time trying to meet new people and explore relationships. By my sophomore year, I decided to try a dating app, hoping to connect with someone outside the usual campus crowd. After a few days of chatting with a girl, we decided to meet at a local bar called Tap House. It was my favorite spot because it had pool tables and I loved playing. I arrived early to warm up and secure a table. After waiting for nearly an hour, I started to think I'd been stood up. Just as I was about to leave, I received a message from her saying she had just arrived. She apologized for being late, and we quickly got comfortable, laughing and talking over drinks. As the night went on, she asked for my Instagram, and moments later, she sent me a series of explicit photos. Surprised but intrigued, I didn't question it. She smiled and said, "Your turn." Though it felt odd, I was tipsy enough to play along. We laughed about it and continued drinking. As the bar started closing, she invited me back to her place. I agreed. When we arrived, I noticed her apartment was in Oakland, an area I didn't realize was her home. Something about the situation felt off, but I ignored my gut and followed her inside. As soon as I stepped through the door, she shut it behind me, and the room lit up. I wasn't alone with her anymore. 3 large men stood inside, 2 by the door, and 1 in front of me. The man closest to me began listing my personal details, my name, my birthday, even my address. Then he said, "The girl you've been talking to is 17. My stomach dropped. He went on to explain that I had incriminated myself by exchanging explicit photos with her, and that they could ruin my life unless I did exactly what they wanted. their demand. I had to distribute illicit substances to my fraternity brothers and classmates. Panicking, I tried to think of a way out. They handed me a pen and paper, demanding I write down names and phone numbers of people I knew. As I pretended to cooperate, I scanned the room for an escape route. The moment I saw an opportunity, I bolted for the door. I pushed past the two men guarding it and ran as fast as I could into the street. I didn't stop until I was far away. I eventually found a house where I begged for help. The residents called the police, who accompanied me back to the apartment. By the time we arrived, the place was empty. No people, no furniture, nothing. The incident left me shaken. I deleted all my dating apps and have never used them again. I still wonder what might have happened if I hadn't escaped. A few months ago, I developed a strange habit of watching my neighbor's house from my balcony. It wasn't intentional at first, but one night while smoking a cigarette, I noticed a black van parked outside his home. It was unusual because I'd only ever seen his navy blue BMW in the driveway. The van kept showing up night after night, and my curiosity grew. One night, around 5 a.m., I saw my neighbor leave his house carrying a large black bag. The way he handled it, carefully and with visible effort, made it clear the bag was heavy. He placed it in the van and drove off. The following night, he returned with the same bag, struggling under its weight as he brought it back into the house. Something about the whole situation felt deeply unsettling. I decided to follow him the next time he left. I waited in my car with the lights off until I saw him drive away. Keeping a safe distance, I tailed him for about 20 minutes until he turned onto a dirt road that led deep into the woods. I parked my car and continued on foot, staying hidden in the shadows. The dirt road opened into a clearing with an abandoned gas station. His black van was parked there, alongside his BMW. The station looked like it had been deserted for years, but I couldn't resist getting closer. The doors were locked, and the windows wouldn't budge. Against my better judgment, I picked up a rock and smashed one of the windows. The sound of shattering glass triggered an alarm. I panicked and ran back to my car, calling the police as I drove away. The next morning, I woke up to flashing lights and a swarm of police cars outside my neighbor's house. I watched as they escorted him out in handcuffs. They spent hours searching the property, but I never found out what they discovered. The road to the gas station was later blocked off, adding to the mystery. To this day, I wonder what was inside that gas station. Whatever my neighbor was involved in, I'm glad I followed my instincts and reported it. I've always been a deep sleeper and rarely had nightmares, so when I started having recurring dreams about a demonic figure, it caught me off guard. The creature had sharp claws, horns, and glowing eyes. In the first dream, it simply stared at me from a distance, but in the second, it got closer. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The third time I saw it in my dreams, it was no longer distant. The demon loomed over me, and I could feel its claws scrape against my thigh. I woke up with a sharp sting and rushed to the bathroom. To my horror, there was a fresh scratch on my skin, deep and red. Terrified, I woke up my roommate, Trish. She helped me check the bed and the room for anything that could have caused the injury, but we found nothing. Then, as we turned off the air conditioner, we heard it, a faint rustling sound coming from under my bed. We bolted out of the apartment and called the police. When the officers arrived, they searched the place and found evidence that someone had been living there. They must have snuck in and out without us noticing. Looking back, I realized the demon in my dreams might have been a warning. Knowing someone was in my room, potentially watching me while I slept, is a terror I'll never forget. The scratches on my leg were a chilling reminder of how close they came. When I was a child, my family lived in an old house in Suffolk County, Long Island. My older brother and I shared a large bedroom on the top floor. The house had a peculiar layout. Our room used to be part of a separate apartment that my dad rented out to an older woman before she moved out. Once it was vacant, the upstairs became our space. Our room was enormous, filled with toys, and it had 2 crawl-in closets on opposite sides where we stored games and other belongings. One of our toys was a race car with buttons that activated its lights and played sounds like honking, revving engines, and a little rock tune. The car had been around for years, initially gifted to my brother when he was younger. One night, my brother and I were in bed, not yet asleep, when out of nowhere, the car activated. Its lights flashed, and the loud sound of the engine revving filled the room. It startled me, and I immediately accused my brother of turning it on to scare me. He laughed, insisting he didn't touch it. The car eventually went silent, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Weeks later, the car acted up again. This time, we were both in bed, and the car made a loud thud before starting its revving noise and flashing its lights. I jumped out of bed and ran downstairs to tell my mom. My brother followed me, equally freaked out. When we explained what had happened, my mom dismissed it, saying it was probably just a malfunctioning toy. My dad checked the car and moved it to the crawl-in closet, hoping that would stop the issue. But the scariest event happened on a night when I was alone in the room. My brother was staying at a friend's house, and I was trying to fall asleep. The house was quiet, and I had left the door slightly open for comfort. At some point in the night, I woke up to a faint sound. When I opened my eyes, I saw the toy car rolling into the middle of the room. Its lights were flashing, and it was revving loudly. It stopped in the center of the floor, as if it were staring at me. I screamed as loud as I could and bolted out of the room, running downstairs to my parents. Through tears, I explained what had happened. My dad came up to the room and looked around, but found nothing unusual. However, when I refused to go back to sleep, he decided to destroy the toy. He took it outside, smashed it with a hammer, and threw it away in a neighbor's trash bin. For a while, I was too scared to sleep in the room alone. My parents eventually convinced me to go back, assuring me there was nothing to fear. But the memory of that car, moving and making noises on its own, still haunts me to this day. I'm not someone who believes easily in the paranormal, but that experience changed my perspective. I'll always wonder if there was something more to that toy than just a mechanical fault.